Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 26 January 2020. Coronavirus, Ragnarok, and board members finally realized that cybersecurity is more than just some guy named Ned down in the basement. All this and more on the show summary. Oh, and the show summary coming right up.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/hack-naked and use the code HN30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the countless ways our critical systems can be put in jeopardy. Ransomware attacks, misconfiguration, user error, and malicious threat actors, to name a few. As IT infrastructures continue to grow and diversify, how do you ensure stable security? Core Security, a HelpSystems company, provides an analytics-driven, layered approach to security with a portfolio that enables both proactive and reactive responses. With Core Security, you can reduce risk by limiting access, detect upcoming and active threats, test for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitor data for actionable insights. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/core security.
All right, I'm Doug White, and welcome to Security Weekly News wrap-up show. Heading into your weekend with all the hot topics from all the shows this week. On Application Security Weekly number 93, Mike, John, and Matt had an interview with John Butler of GuardSquare. The topic was dynamically protecting mobile applications with RASP. RASP stands for Runtime Application Self-Protection, and typically refers to using a server that's sitting on top of a mobile device somewhere and managing. It's running like high cover or whatever you want to call that on apps that are running to detect any kind of attacks on those apps. GuardSquare RASP particularly focused on 2 of the top 10 OWASP mobile risks. I can't talk today. On Business Security Weekly number 160, Matt and Paul had an interview with Michael Figueroa, who is an independent executive security advisor. That sounds important. I should give myself something title like that. The topic of the interview was CISO challenges in a changing world, and focuses on the role of CISOs in small and large enterprises and the balance of communication, leadership, ownership, governance, and the board. And yes, there's an Oxford comma on there. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 170, Paul, Matt, and John covered the first part of a series on migrating legacy apps to the cloud. The segment talks about moving homegrown apps and open source tools, containers, and other applications which exist in your current environment into cloud-based environments. They covered a lot of technical details about moving into Docker with those apps and then moving those Dockers into cloud-based services. Docker configs and strategies for the containers were also part of the segment. Very important topic because all of us have legacy apps that are running, and we all have started talking about how to move those into the cloud. In addition, on that show this week, they had an interview with Stephen Bay of Security on Demand. If you don't know, Stephen Bay, this is a cool segment. Stephen Bay was the person who hired Edward Snowden in Hawaii and managed him until he fled from Hawaii or from the U.S. with secret NSA data and is still on the run today. The primary focus of the interview was on dealing with insider threats, as you might imagine, and why they can be so dangerous. This is a great segment, so you should definitely go back and check it out if you missed it. On the Security Weekly News number 7, Jason Wood provided expert commentary talking about the revelation that Avast Antivirus, who reports that they have 435 million active users, were collecting and selling data through their subsidiary JumpShot, and they were taking this from their clients. A lot of concerns immediately emerged early in the week, so we were talking about this on the news on Tuesday. I have another story about this on the show today. But basically, I'm sure all of you are aware, antivirus pretty much is given root access to just about everything on your system so that it can monitor everything from the registry to your browser behavior. And Jason was primarily talking about what a threat this posed and how you could opt out. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 15, they're already up to number 15, Jeff, Matt, Scott, and Josh talked about cyber insurance and a lot about how that works today. The relationship and dilution of responsibility between all the brokers, underwriters, and reinsurance companies that are involved creates a fairly complex industry development at this point in time. So they talked about who's eligible and what kind of hoops you might have to jump through to actually get cyber insurance these days, as well as commentary on the cost of cyber insurance versus just the cost of, I guess, doing incident response. There's a lot of complexity there. If you already have or you don't have cyber insurance, this is certainly a segment you may want to check out. And I have another story about that from Security Weekly News that we'll talk about in a little bit. Finally, last night, they're still cleaning up the wreckage from Paul's Security number 637. While they didn't have me on as host last night, Paul, Larry, Matt, Lee, and Jeff talked first with Gene Kim. If you missed that, you missed out, but you can still go watch it because it's posted. Gene is an award-winning CTO who has written 6 books. In particular, he wrote the Unicorn Project and the Phoenix Project, which are must-read kind of books at this point in time. He also wrote some. We'll put the others in the other category. But they talked a lot about the Unicorn Project and the 5 ideals. They also talked about why he thinks DevOps will be one of the most important economy segments for the foreseeable future. Now, if you have listened to Security Weekly or any of Paul's other shows lately, you know that Paul loves those 2 books. He's a huge fanboy of Gene Kim. So you should definitely check that segment out if you missed it. In the second segment, Peter Smith, and there was another don't miss this segment. In the second segment last night, Peter Smith from Edgewise was the guest. Peter's the CEO of Edgewise, and he built out Harvard University's first NAC system quite a while before NAC was actually a thing. This was a tech segment, and it focused on stopping Python backdoor attacks. In particular, Mecha Flounder was a recent Python attack that was linked to Iran and targeted Turkish assets. So if you're a purple teamer or a Python developer, or you just like hearing somebody tell you how to do backdoor Python applications, well, this was a segment for you. So you should, I would go, if you missed that one, or even if you watch it, you want to go back and watch it again. I actually went back and watched it again because I was really interested in taking some notes. I've been doing a lot of Python stuff, and I was interested in some of the things that they talked about. Based on the shows this week, my favorite threat, I think, and I don't always have a threat here, but cyber insurance. We have insurance for our cars, our business, our homes, pretty much everything. But cyber insurance is still a fledgling industry despite cyber threats stretching back. And we've had cyber insurance for a while, but I think the industry is still struggling to find out what it really means to offer and or have cyber insurance. Do you need it? Do you need it at home? Do you need it at work? And on and on and on. What if you don't have it? I mean, if you want it, what should you buy and how should you pay for it and how much should it cost? If you're an insurer, how much should you charge people to cover them and what should you cover? This is a threat because not many of us nor our enterprises seem to really have a solid feel right now for how this works. So I have a lot of concerns around cyber insurance and what the future holds in that regard. My breach of the week, well, it was a story from Security Weekly that came out about the Wawa breach. So what's a Wawa, you may be asking yourself. If you're not from New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that region, you probably never heard the term Wawa. But in the Mid-Atlantic, a Wawa is a generic term for mini-mart type convenience stores. So if you're from the South, you may have heard people say 7-Eleven or even used to be a chain called convenient stores. Wawa is so ubiquitous that a chain with the same name, Wawa, Wawa Limited, formed up, or maybe the name actually came from the chain. I really don't know, but I do know what a Wawa is. This breach reportedly affected 30 million credit card records, which today doesn't really sound like that much. If you heard Paul talking about the story on the show last night, what he said too was like, used to there would have been a time when he said 30 million breached records would have been like the end of the world. Today it's like, not such a big deal. But 30 million credit card records of customers resulted from malware on the in-store payment processing systems and the fuel dispensers at all Wawa locations. So Wawa Inc., based in Pennsylvania, said that PIN numbers and the CVV, that's the little secret, the secret code they put on your card, were not disclosed, but that the card numbers, the expiration dates, and the names of the cardholders were all at risk. All these cards showed up on Joker Stash for sale on Monday evening, and they called this the Big Bada Boom 3. So it was a fairly large breach for the week. Things to read up on this week. My suggestion this time was thinking about your opt-ins. Opt-ins are a thing that caught my eye with a Ring story that was on Security Weekly last night, and also with this Avast report from Enterprise Security Weekly. All of these things made me start really sort of getting that creepy feeling like maybe I should go back through all these immense numbers of apps I've installed over the years and make sure I actually did opt out. Because as you well know by now, every single thing opts you in automatically with a checkbox that's pre-ticked. So you're basically saying you can do whatever you want to me. And that's a bit scary. And then one of my concerns was that going back through, when updates come out, I've noticed a lot of times, and they used to call this bloatware, but a lot of times when you install an update, I was installing a Java update the other day, I noticed there were some opt-in boxes checked. When you install browser updates, they often have those boxes that you unchecked when you originally installed it, rechecked, and if you install that update, it may actually opt you back into who knows what. I think there was a South Park about that, it was called Human Centipede. You don't watch that. I watched like 15 minutes of that movie. It was like, no thanks. But the South Park's pretty funny about the Apple opt-ins. I was really disappointed to hear all this about Avast, since I had recommended them to clients and other people and used them myself. But I do have a story about that, too, in the news segment, so be sure and stick around for that. My malware of the week was Ragnarok Ransomware. It's a fairly new one that primarily focuses on Citrix, and it can disable Windows Defender before it encrypts you. Citrix had a vulnerability, which is now patched, but if you haven't run that patch and you're using Citrix, it allowed the installation of this malware. It's another malware based on Eternal Blue, Windows Server Messaging Block Compromise, which has been around forever. But much like WannaCry and others that use this exploit, it goes out looking for Windows boxes that are subject to it. The ransomware, and this is the interesting part, the ransomware had built-in exclusions for Russia and a lot of other countries, and it also had a built-in exclusion for China, which was sort of a new and unusual thing. Basically, what they did was they looked for the Windows language ID that's being used on the system and lays off of countries that were included in the list, which included Russia, Belarus, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Latvia, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan, and strangely enough, China. Don't know what that means, but it was kind of an interesting point. All the files that are encrypted will have the .ragnarok extension, and currently the AES-based encryption is not going to be broken. So patch up if you don't want to get hit by Ragnarok. And now all the top news from all the shows. My top story this week was coronavirus claims a new victim. DEFCON canceled. So the DEFCON is canceled joke, which if you don't know that joke, well, you haven't been around very long. This is the ever annual joke that DEFCON is canceled. It gets posted everywhere. But this time, apparently, it is real. Not the DEFCON in Las Vegas, though. DEFCON China was officially postponed or canceled this week. And basically, that's the first time that we've actually had that come through. I know somebody can't resist posting DEFCON has been canceled, but guess what? This time, coronavirus managed to get DEFCON China, anyway, canceled for this year, or at least postponed for the foreseeable future. Well, don't know what's going to happen with that. The CDC, though, did issue a Level 3 travel advisory for China, as well as a Level 4 advisory for Wuhan, Hebei province, due to the novel coronavirus epidemic that's currently raging through China. If you don't know what those mean, Level 3 means don't go if you can help it, and Level 4 means just don't go. China's been quarantining outbreaks all over China, and oftentimes returning travelers are now running into all sorts of trouble. So if you have to go to China, try not to sneeze or cough in the airport, or you may get put in quarantine as well. In the same light, a cruise ship was stopped in Italy with about 5,000 people on board, and they were put under quarantine due to a passenger from Macau who was apparently sick. They did start letting some people off the ship last night. But the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus is a global health emergency. In other news, I bumped this story right up at the top when I saw it. Avast, of earlier fame, Avast shut down JumpShot in a surprise announcement on Thursday. So this was yesterday, saying that the company had decided to terminate the JumpShot data collection and wind it down, whatever that means. It said they're going to wind down the operation with immediate effect. I guess that means they stopped doing it. Basically, what happened was after this announcement earlier in the week that we had reported on multiple shows, there was a huge outcry from customers on Twitter. People got very upset that they were collecting this information, which includes timestamps and behaviors. The example I saw of something Avast was collecting were clicks. So they were collecting what you clicked on and when you did that. JumpShot was then selling that information to, they didn't say who all the third parties were. You probably still want to check on the state of your antivirus regardless of whose you use, because I doubt this is an isolated case. I doubt they will really be able to give up all that sweet cash as we've seen from Facebook and others. They say they're going to stop doing it, but then they go, wow, do you realize what this is going to cost us this year? And it's really easy to say you're going to stop doing something, but actually stopping doing that are two different things. I always remember one of my college roommates used to quit smoking several times a week and give me all of his cigarettes and say, here you go, I can quit anytime I want. And an hour later, he was going, could you loan me some cigarettes? So, I have my doubts. I have a little faith in a lot of these organizations who say they're not going to continue selling data because they make a lot of money doing it. Reuters reported that cyber insurance rates were rising as much as 25% due to the number and amount of claims in 2019. A lot of this was due to ransomware becoming deeper and more damaging with rising rates of payouts. The average ransom, the average ransom in quarter 3 of 2019 was $41,000. I don't know how they compute that, but there is a report. But this had more than tripled since the first quarter of 2019, and the payouts seem to be really rising quickly. Modern malware frameworks mean the customization of these attacks and remote attack capabilities of ransomware have become far easier and far more damaging. By quarter 4, the average payouts were in like $90,000, so it had doubled again. So as they experience all these hits insurance-wise, again, I mentioned earlier that cyber insurance is a complicated issue. They were talking about that on Security and Compliance Weekly. I think a lot of insurers have not fully grasped what they're insuring, but they had customers asking for it, and it was like, okay, well, yeah, we'll insure that. And now they're starting to say, wow, and then they get popped with this ransomware. And the average duration of ransomware was like 16.2 days. So you can imagine the damage this does to organizations. We've had story after story after story already just this year in the month of January about the number of ransomware attacks that had occurred. Motherboard Magazine has obtained the FTI consulting report, which describes how Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman allegedly hacked Bezos' phone. Back in 2018, apparently a video was sent to Jeff Bezos, which contained an encrypted downloader, which immediately resulted in, I presume, it going to the command and control server and then transmitting a large amount of data from Bezos' iPhone X. The video was delivered through WhatsApp, which is an encrypted downloader, if you're not familiar with how that works. And all of this made investigation of it quite complicated. But researchers went on, a different report stated that Apple's secretive and highly sophisticated security systems, which sounds like a good thing, actually make it easier to exploit devices if you are actually able to get into the device somehow. And the homogeneity across Apple products means that a single exploit means you can work across a lot of devices. If this was indeed a nation-state attack, meaning the Saudi Arabian government, they have a lot of resources and money to throw at these kind of problems. So I guess the point of that article was that if you've got enough resources and you can find a way into Apple, because they assume the security is so good, once you're inside, there's not a lot of security there. So there are a couple of articles there that you may want to check out if you're following that story. Charges against Justin Wynn and Gary DiMercurio of Coal Fire were dropped this week. They were arrested in response to their Dallas County courthouse break-in last fall. Coal Fire was hired by the state court administration in Dallas County to basically conduct a physical pen test, but not everybody was notified about this, and the two pen testers got arrested because the hiring agency, the state court administration, and the local law enforcement pretty much didn't know what was going on with each other, and the local law enforcement people came up. This, of course, led to a lot of discussion about scope of work and scoping documents and who sees those documents when you're testing particularly certain entities. I know I used to do physical pen tests, and we had scoping documents on private companies, and even then I was very concerned, what happens when you are climbing in a window and somebody driving past sees you and calls the local police because they weren't notified. And so be careful out there if you're doing physical pen tests, Tyler. A bug lets an attacker execute arbitrary shell commands with elevated privileges using email. This bug is in OpenSMTPD, which is a free email server that is pretty widely used on certain platforms, and it uses, of course, the SMTP protocol that all email servers use. Apparently, the vulnerability exploit is inspired by the Morris worm, and it exfiltrates data using the exploit. The bug, which was found by Qualys, is found in OpenBSD 6.6 and Debian Bullseye, but other distros may also be vulnerable. If you use OpenSMTPD, you probably should read this article and patch up now, because this thing could be really, really nasty. Cisco launched an IoT security architecture to deliver enhanced visibility across IoT and OT environments. These threats, in my opinion, are rising rapidly. We keep adding all these devices, and ICS is also seeming to jump into this model. We started bringing ICS systems online, connecting them to our networks. A lot of this stuff, just like IoT and OT devices, are old and or not designed or engineered with security in mind. And a lot of times, particularly in ICS and IoT, the idea that they're going to be exposed to the outside world was not really considered when they were designing the firmware. Proposed laws in the UK would require IoT and other consumer smart devices to adhere to specific security requirements. The requirements, which were developed by the National Cybersecurity Center in the UK, are trying to reduce the threat surface from these now ubiquitous devices that we find just about everywhere. Insecure configurations of remote access and admin features with patient monitoring devices at the same time were found in the GE Healthcare ICS IoT type systems. All of these issues have been a problem for a while with healthcare devices, but in this case, hard-coded credentials, we keep saying that, you keep hearing it. We hear this hard-coded firmware credentials, hard-coded SSL keys, you name it. Misconfigurations of these devices and other threats can bring all these healthcare providers to a screeching halt. All that IoT stuff, ICS stuff, is terrifying to me. I've been talking about that for 20 years, literally. I remember talking about it to the United States military a long time ago, just talking about chipsets and firmware and trying to explain what all that meant, because everything's got all this stuff built into it. IoT means we got drones flying around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know that whole sermon, but it's really become an issue. In a survey of board members, 20 to be exact, of large corporations, it was found that the directors believed cybersecurity risk to be a fundamental hazard to the continued existence of the enterprise. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to take a minute on that. I'm glad they picked up on that. The study, conducted by UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity and Booz Allen Hamilton, interviewed 20 board members from U.S. companies across a bunch of industries. The findings also found that board members felt that cyber risk is no longer confined to a set of operational decisions to be left solely in the hands of IT management. I was like, really? Wow, I'm so glad that you finally realized that. Literally. They also found that information and processes are not in place to provide effective governance related to cyber risk. You think? Boy, I tell you. That story, go read that story, because all of you will sit there and go, seriously? I mean, I don't know when the board members realize this, but this is a problem we've all been facing for years and years and years. When taking this to the board, trying to convince the upper management that this stuff is really a threat, and them just turning it back over to some guy in the basement named Ned, who is in charge of IT, email, changing the printer toners and everything else, and then also saying, oh yeah, and be sure it's all secure. Thanks. We'll get back to you on that, and no, the pay raise was turned down. Chipotle and Target CISOs have started advocating repurposing talent for cybers. They went on in that article to talk about how reaching out to other areas, other disciplines, and so forth may actually be a good thing for cybersecurity. Primarily, the article focused on due to the difficulty of finding experienced individuals to fill the empty positions, all of which required 6 to 10 years of experience in cybersecurity, which they were having trouble recruiting for. They advocated that CISOs need to be willing to adopt a more generous approach to finding talent and finding ways to create security ninjas by repurposing talented individuals from other experienced technical people in other areas. This is a sort of the song remains the same kind of thing. We heard this back in the 80s about programmers. We heard this in the 90s about analysts. We've heard this about other disciplines where they have a tough time recruiting. Finally, I like this story. The 1987 classic video game Tecmo Bowl has been re-released by Hamster Corp, providing this old school 8-bit graphics, old school 8-bit gameplay, and the 8-bit sounds of gaming in days gone by. And if you're interested in classic sports game in time for the Super Bowl, this is one for you. Now, this is not the popular port of that original game. If you're of a certain age, you may remember playing this early video game, which is really cheesy, but it was a classic. This is the original game, so it's not the port that they later put out there. It's available on PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch shops. Surprisingly enough, the price of this classic game is $8. Coincidence? I think not. Check and mate, Hamster Corp. I'm on to you. And that is the news wrap-up for the week of 26 January 2020. I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University and Security Weekly. See you next week with more shows, more security news, and more security news wrap-up. Thanks.